So I know you've been sitting for a long time, so I know it's hard because I've been in the chairs like you have. I'm going to just talk for a minute, just to put the disclosure on the table. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a researcher. What I am is somebody that's tried to help build and scale technology-based companies. I've spent 27 years outside the U.S. So I've spent 10, 11 living and working in Europe, and now 16 plus in Asia. So the basic philosophy that I'd like to just share with you briefly is Singapore, as a nation, has been and is continuing to grow through innovation. So if we think about important problems that had to be solved, things that were not options, things that must be tackled for the good of people around, Singapore is a case study that I like to try and think about a lot, in part because I believe it, and in part because I'm here and we want to build cool things from Singapore. So in a nutshell, thinking about housing. For those that know, or maybe those that don't know, just to remind ourselves that in the late 50s, early 60s, a high percentage, as close as 50% of Singapore population lived in substandard housing, without some of the sanitation, without some of the safety. So it became a very critical problem that had to be solved. An engineering problem, a design problem, a social problem. And the reason that this is important is because this intersection of capabilities, of the engineering, of what had to happen with materials, we just heard about materials, of how people were going to think of housing differently, and of course the implications on health and safety, which then laid the foundation for education to become a priority. And so now as we think about where this has led, Singapore has many firsts, and we're very excited. Having lived here a long time, I speak in the first person. We're very excited about these because they're benchmarks. But here's the way that we would think of it, is so what? So it's great to be first in networking capabilities. It's great to be first in World Economic Forum assessments with certain areas. So we're very excited about that. But the question is, so what? And what we'd like to do is reframe it as, what can we do with that? Our challenge is we have many, many resources, many capabilities, but we don't do enough with it. And so part of what we're trying to do is look in the mirror and say, these are realities. There are many challenges. We've heard about all kinds of exciting technology already this morning, and there's much more to come this afternoon and tomorrow. But the challenge for us is, even though we have all of these things that we are proud of having achieved, so what? What can we do with that? And so now what we want to do is use this way of just representing a big thought. And I refer back to our friend Jason Ponton from the MIT Technology Review, who 5 years ago wrote a piece saying why we cannot or why we can't do big things. It was a very specific why we can't. We've reframed it slightly into why can't we, because we want to make it a bit more of an aspiration. Why can't we do big things? But the example, of course, often invoked is going to the moon. But the role of government in supporting and driving and funding, most importantly, the innovation that was necessary for a man to go to the moon and return safely was, in large part, something that is impossible for anyone now to recreate. So instead, what we're trying to do is not think about man on the moon moments, but what can we do with the assets and the capabilities and the tools that we have, and importantly, how can we raise the standard? This article, and I'd encourage you to look at it, read it, spend some time with it, which is how are VCs funding, how are governments playing a role, are people expecting too little from technology? Even though it's amazing, is it amazing outside of the research? Is it amazing in changing lives for the better? And are people building things that are transformative, or are we building things that are on top of something that went before, as opposed to the next iteration of amazingness? So what we're trying to do now is say, why are we not doing it? We've tried to unpack that question a little bit. Why are we not? So is it that we don't have enough of this? Is it we don't have enough funding? No, we think we have enough funding. Singapore has billions of dollars of money in different areas that are available. And the private sector, of course, we're very thankful for a number of venture capitalists and private equity players in Singapore. So funding, we don't think, is the issue. We can always argue, does it need to be more in this area or more in that area? But as a general statement, we don't think funding is the constraint. Is it something around corporates? We need more corporate big partners. We need more people that are going to support exits. Again, we have 7,000 plus corporations in Singapore that consider Singapore a big base. So we don't think it's a lack of corporate support. Is it something to do with universities? Do we need better education? Do we need more science education? Do we need more diversity in education? Again, we'd argue that with 2 of the world's top 15 universities by ranking, Singapore is not suffering from a lack of commitment to higher education. So we don't think it's that. R&D, we have $19 billion allocated over the next 5 years for R&D. Continues to be a sustained, predictable, long-term commitment to R&D from the Prime Minister on down. And I'm a part of the National Research Foundation by extension, so we're big believers in the importance of R&D predictably and sustainably, which means what we know today is going to continue to be important tomorrow, as opposed to things that rise and fall with any particular administration. So we know that that's not the issue. Government support, very supportive, very clear on the importance of science and technology and engineering and how these play a vital role to the building, not only of Singapore, but of countries around the world. So we know it's not those things. So our question then is, okay, it's not by that extension what's important to us, so now what do we think that it might be? The simple answer, although difficult to work on, is courage. Do we collectively have the courage to take risk? And this isn't a personalized message of he or she doesn't, it's do we have the courage to take risk? Do we have the ability to embark on something that we don't know the answer to, with the idea that it almost certainly won't work in the way that we'd hoped at the first effort, or second, or third? And for those in the room that do or don't love Elon Musk, I'm a big believer in the ongoing iteration of SpaceX. So this idea of it didn't work, but let's try again and learn from it. And of course, the Apollo program would have been a great example of that, where many, many things had to be uncovered and discovered along the way. But we, collectively, have this scenario of we know this works, this model is fairly predictable. If I extend that model a bit, my outcome is relatively assured, or at least my risk is substantially lower. The challenge of saying I have no idea between here and there, but I'm going to solve those problems as they arise, is harder. And that's part of the reality of a matured economy or a matured ecosystem that has more to lose. So that's the imagination behind why we set up SGInnovate. And the idea was, how do we bring something to those men and women that do have the intersection of capability and ambition? And it's not my goal to say to everybody in the room, let's go do something as a big mob. It would be for those individuals that think that they can do something and have something to pursue, we'd like to see how to be of help. So we're this sort of hybrid between government and private sector. We are a private limited company. We are owned by one shareholder called the Ministry of Finance. So we are a hybrid between government and private. But that's important because it allows us to take actions and it allows us to do things that may be more difficult for others, but at the same time have the link back to the assets that we spoke about. So we put money into those deep tech or advanced tech, whatever terminology, a high barrier to entry type of technology. What we are not seeking to do is to run models where we say, that taxi booking app worked very well in country X, let's find a way to replicate or do that here. There are people that have built successful businesses, so it's not my goal to say that's a bad economic model, it's just not our economic model. So we want to put money into things that we hope and can work together to make a difference. We'd like to work on things that involve elderly, because an aging population, as my teammate Kung outlined this morning, an aging population has implications for transport and health and housing, so we know that's important. We know that issues around transportation and other means are also important. What can we do from Singapore? Talent, we're trying to be a two-sided market. We're trying to know as many people as we can and as many markets as we can, and for them to know us. We're trying to know as many entrepreneurs and startups and early-stage companies and technology as we can so that we can try and bring people together. We're not trying to fit anyone as much as make sure that people that are amazing know each other. and customers. We're very fortunate that on our board, we have some big players like Temasek and GIC, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Economic Development Board. We have many different private sector leaders on our board, and the hope and the expectation is if somebody is working on something that needs validation, with a phone call, we can arrange for him or her to meet the CTO or the CEO of a major organization that they normally wouldn't get to, so we can validate and make sure that we're on the right path as early as we can. That's a simple explanation of what we're trying to do. Now, what we're trying to think about is very specific and practical ways. Here's something that we worked on over the course of the weekend here together with our friends from the Singapore MIT Alliance for Research and Technology. We had a MIT Hacking Medicine, and the whole theme was social robotics for elder care. So think of this as loneliness is a big health issue. We have people that don't have the ability to move or don't have the ability to have monitoring at home and therefore have to go into care. So we wanted to think about this as a problem in which the intersection of engineers, social architects, natural language processing, computer vision, all of these different capabilities could be brought to bear. Teams working on it. We started on Friday. We went through till Sunday. We had a pre-hack before that. That's how we get to the 67 hours. Here's a couple of examples. We were building on the Segway robotics platform in this particular case. We'll use other robotics platforms. We do work with NVIDIA as a deep learning type of engine. We have lots of different partners for which we're very thankful. But this is what we worked on over this particular weekend. Here's an example of a gentleman taking a break after a long amount of work. Then we have the gentleman that decided he needed to catch a nap, which is always part of the hack. And then this particular guy I loved because he showed up ready for a long weekend with a neck pillow and complete outfit so that he didn't have to go anywhere for the 48 hours. And this particular type of commitment is something that we want to try and encourage. The important message here is not that we had the hack. It's that we're going to put money into those companies that we saw starting to emerge as potential teams and exciting men and women. It's not that we do something and declare victory. It's, can we put another 50,000 to take it to the next stage? Do we need 200,000 to explore how that computer vision might improve the movement of that device at the home? How can we monitor somebody using a natural language processing interface that would allow them to relate to the robot as a proxy social companion? And can we make that more and more friendly and usable? So we want to put money into those because we believe that those are important. And we believe that whether we see a return in the near term or not is not our concern. Our concern is whether we can pursue something that has a greater impact for more people than a purely economic outcome. That's why we're the hybrid between private and public. Now, what we want to do is work with amazing men and women like these, the innovators under 35. So I know you're going to be seeing some of them during the day today and tomorrow. The reason that we wanted to be a part of supporting these men and women is because amazing people that have amazing ambition and capability lead to some exciting outcomes. And that's exactly what it is that we're trying to be a part of. So what I'd like to do is leave you with, if you want to continue the dialogue or there's something that we can talk about, we have different ways to relate. I'm Steve at SGInnovate.com, so it's pretty easy on the email. What we're trying to do is say Singapore has the capability to build globally relevant technology-based products. We set too low a bar for ourselves sometimes, and what we want to do is raise that bar. All of you represent an amazing brain trust. We try to represent a way to take what you're working on and find a path for it to have an impact on the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions from the audience for Steve? I think you have set us up nicely to start talking with seeing some of these innovators. But before we do that, I think I know the answer, how you're going to answer my question. But I'm curious if you can share with the audience sort of the way you interpret things like the valuation of Snapchat and the way that the capital markets reward technologies that aren't necessarily solving the world's greatest problems, but that are doing other things. And what do you make of that? How do you resolve that in your own mind?
So to be clear, because I have a lot of friends in this room and in the ecosystem at large, this is not a VCs aren't doing good work pitch, because we think VCs are amazing, by the way. But what we are saying is VCs, as a general statement, are paid to drive returns. And they're paid to drive returns for those investors that have invested money with them in the shortest possible logical time. And so when we say Snapchat goes from nothing to 25 billion valuation in 5 years, that's what the markets have decided that particular type of advertising and use case represents. DeepMind went out for less than $500 million, even though it's doing amazing work that will lead to more advance in medical technology using some of its neural network. So we would say that's a more important social outcome, DeepMind, than Snapchat. But in order to drive a return for shareholders in the shortest possible time, VCs make good decisions to optimize and put their money into Snapchat. What we're trying to do is say, what can the role of government and like-minded investors be where we see that something longer term is worth backing, even though on a purely financial metric, it may not be the best decision. That's that intersection that SGInnovate and other parts of Singapore government are trying to play. Long-term, big, transformational, high impact, even though the valuation isn't something that we'll be rewarded with.
Right.
Okay?
Great. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much.